Today and across the fence, the color and care of one of the most popular holiday plants, the poinsettia. And we'll meet a Vermont farming couple in the midst of their harvest for herbal medicines. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us on this Thanksgiving Day for a special half-hour edition of Across the Fence. I'm Judy Simpson. Our first segment this afternoon centers on Vermont's natural environment. For years, conservationists and farmers have teamed together to create protective buffers between farm fields and waterways. The buffers help control runoff and improve water quality. By all accounts, the protective buffers work. In the face of more severe flooding, new research is exploring economically viable ways to entice more farmers to plant buffers. Across the Fence's Rebecca Gollin explains.
We're excited about growing this. It's going to fit within our 50-foot buffer here for our stream.
In Jeffersonville, John Hayden is showing off his aronia, also known as black chokeberry. Hayden and his wife Nancy own the farm between. They have been farming this land for over 20 years, and in the last few years have expanded into growing a variety of fruits.
And we've evolved more recently in the past 7 years or so to be growing mostly perennial fruit. So we grow a whole slew of fruits, from apples, blueberries, strawberries, and the very common fruit that everybody enjoys, to some more alternative fruits like elderberries, black currants, haskaps, saskatoons. And we sell them fresh, and we also sell them as value-added products in jams and syrups.
Hayden had dabbled in growing fruit before, but it was the idea of making the value-added products that got him experimenting.
And that just opened the gates for me to be able to grow small patches of really interesting fruits.
He's been growing aronia for a couple of years, making sure it does well and works as a syrup. He planted a full row of it this year to test it on a larger scale and see if there's a market for it among their customers. But that's not the only reason Hayden is trying out this new plant.
We've had severe floods here 3 times, once in 1995 and then 2 times in 2011. So that spring, and then we had Irene, and there were both floods were about equally as bad for us. Got in the barn, you know, this is knee deep in the barn, in our farm stand and stuff like that, and flooded our crops, and we lost crops, and that was like kind of the eye opener for us.
You know, Vermont has always experienced what was typically called spring flooding.
Ginger Nickerson works for the University of Vermont Extension's Center for Sustainable Agriculture.
What we've been seeing more recently is wetter springs, sometimes more intense rainfalls, so more flooding either because we're getting more rain or more intense rain.
After Irene, there were subsequent recommendations from the FDA to not replant in soil that had been flooded for at least 60 days. That led to a flood of farmers calling for advice.
Most farms knew that they wouldn't be able to sell food where the edible part had come in contact with floodwaters. What surfaced after Irene was this more recent guideline or recommendation from the FDA about not replanting for 60 days afterwards. And so that's when farmers learned about that, that's when they started contacting Extension and asking us, you know, well, what could we plant instead?
Farmers and researchers around the state began to look into whether it would be possible to extend riparian zones with something that would be both economically and environmentally viable.
You would have the buffer that's along the river or stream for conservation purposes that is left alone. These harvestable crops would be planted between the conservation buffer and your production field, but within the areas that can get impacted by flooding, but still provide the farm a harvestable product for either on-farm inputs or commercial sale.
The agricultural community is critical to flood resiliency because it maintains these floodplains for us.
Marley Roop is an agricultural water quality specialist for the state. She says that thinking about growing crops in riparian zones is new for the state, but worth looking into. The biggest concern is maintaining the integrity of buffer zones.
buffers, by definition, both in state statute and in most of the research literature, are a perennial vegetated area that's undisturbed, that's not managed. And when we look at buffers, we don't necessarily want to manage them too much. When we're looking at flood resiliency, protection from flooding, it's important to let the buffers be as they are and leave the trees and shrubs growing there, because it does help control the soil and the erosion.
Farmers are regulated by the state to have a 10 to 25-foot buffer around any water on their property. If planting perennial crops in adjacent areas proves successful, the hope is that more farmers would be encouraged to expand their buffers further into these low-maintenance, low-impact areas.
If we protect the floodplain and give the river room to move, the effects of flooding on towns downstream and farms downstream are decreased.
Liz Brownlee has been working with a number of farms around the state, testing different plants and growing scenarios.
We want to have good data from Vermont that says these buffers are protecting our drinking water. And we want to have good data that says that these buffers are holding stream banks in place. And then on the economic side of it, we need to know, can a farmer make money from this? We don't want to suggest it as a strategy if it's not a winning strategy.
This could be flooded for a day or two, and there would be no harm. It does well in wet situations.
At the farm between, the Haydens spent years letting the vegetation around the stream on their property grow undisturbed. And now they have no regrets about their decision to extend that buffer.
So this past spring, we had some huge flash flooding here. The area that we're standing on right now was basically a 30-foot wide river, and I washed out my irrigation system, and the field we're standing in behind you, we used to plant corn or potatoes or beans, annual crops in there. And if we had done that this past year, half that field would be in Lake Champlain now.
It's not all fruits and berries. Farmers around the state have been experimenting with plants that do better in wetter conditions. They don't require as much maintenance and can be used around the farm or turned into value-added products.
The types of things that we're looking at now in terms of the on-farm benefits are woody perennials for biomass production that could be used for heating greenhouses or chicken houses.
Some, like Hayden, are turning small branches from their woody perennials into a nutrient-rich type of mulch called ramail.
So we're cutting our box elders, our birches, silver maples that all do great in wetland areas, and chipping them and using them as a fertilizer on our crops, and that's been working out really well.
Nickerson cautions that even if it proves successful to grow crops around riparian zones, it's not going to be a solution for every piece of land.
Rivers are dynamic, they're almost like living creatures, and there are parts of their beds where they are going to want to scour and move. And in those places, it doesn't make economic sense for a landowner or a farmer to make a long-term investment.
The hope is that this is just one of many tools that Vermont farmers are putting into place when we're thinking about climate change and flood resiliency as well.
Ongoing research with the potential to help Vermont farms become more flood resilient and more profitable. It's an idea so new, it doesn't even have a name. In Jeffersonville, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Well, joining me now is Liz Brownlee. Liz has been coordinating the buffer research for the Vermont River Conservancy and Lake Champlain Sea Grant program. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So who's involved in this work and why?
Well, they're a group of farmer advocates and conservationists, Extension, the UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Ag especially, as well as the Vermont River Conservancy, Lake Champlain Sea Grant, and NOFA. But there are also a lot of farmers involved, so folks who came up with this idea on their own, and their interest is kind of the same as ours. It's more buffers, it's better flood resilience. And a farmer explained it best to me from his perspective. He said that it just makes a lot of sense to care for the river and make a profit at the same time.
Excellent. Well, in the video we saw the Hayden farm. Do all the multifunctional buffers look like the Haydens, or are they all different?
No, it can be different based on what the farm needs. Ideally, there's a strip of perennial native vegetation that's left alone, undisturbed, along the river, but from there it can be whatever woody crops make sense, whether it's raspberries, elderberries, box elder, or something else.
And so is there proof that buffers with crops protect the environment and generate a profit?
It's a good question. We have a lot of different types of evidence. Anecdotal evidence, like from John and Nancy Hayden. We also have evidence from researchers in Canada who are seeing that, that harvesting from the buffer can actually sustain or even improve buffer function. Buffers are kind of like a sponge, right? So they absorb nutrients, they absorb floodwaters, but if your sponge gets saturated, you have to wring it out from time to time. So harvesting actually pulls nutrients from the buffer and lets it keep doing its job.
And so if someone is interested in learning more, what should they do?
They should contact Ginger Nickerson at UVM Extension. Her number is 656-5490, and her email is also on the screen. We're setting up long-term research trials to really look at the economics and the ecology of this idea so that we can say for sure if this makes sense for Vermont farmers, and we hope folks will reach out to Ginger if they want to be involved with that or if they want to learn more.
Well, it's worth a try anyway.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it.
It's important. Thank you so much. Well, our next segment takes us to Hyde Park. That's where Keith Silva found a Vermont farming couple who turned their harvests into herbal medicines and more.
On a warm summer morning, a stand of echinacea bristles with bees. Echinacea is important in the garden because it promotes pollinators. The insects flitting from flower to flower keep things growing, healthy, and alive. The echinacea, grown at Zack Herb Farm in Hyde Park, is prized for another benefit: medicine.
An average echinacea root probably weighs dried about maybe between 2 and 4 ounces. We expect out of this crop of echinacea to get maybe 100, maybe 150 pounds. So we should call Free at Buffalo Mountain Co-op and ask him if he's ready to receive some of this garlic.
Great.
Since 1999, Jeff and Melanie Carpenter have been growing herbs used to make botanic or herbal medicines and medicinal teas. Theirs is a marriage of farmers and herbalists.
My dad's side of the family were dairy farmers, and I sort of grew up, going to the farm and visiting the farm, and was always intrigued by that, and loved the tractor and the scenery and the whole thing. And for a while there, I sort of left the agricultural world, not ever thinking I'd return, but I knew it was always in my blood, and so I came back, and this is what I do, and this is what I love to do, and this is what I'll always do. As difficult as it is and as challenging as it is, this is what I do.
Well, I was really fortunate growing up. I was raised in a family that had rich traditions of herbalism. I was raised by my stepmother, Rosemary Gladstar, and she had been trained by her grandmother. So we passed that information on, grandmother to mother, mother to daughter, and it was really special. And so then as we were growing up, we just learned how to make teas, tinctures, salves, how to grow plants, how to identify herbs, and use them in our daily lives.
Zack Herb Farm is the largest farm of its kind, growing certified organic medicinal herbs in Vermont and the Northeast. Like any farm product, herbs are best when harvested at their peak of flavor and freshness, not to mention potency. After harvesting, the herbs are placed in a drying shed.
This is a type of basil called Tulsi. Some people call it sacred basil. This was brought in here fresh, and now it's dehydrated and ready to be processed for sale. It's about 105 degrees in here normally, so we can dehydrate herbs in as little as 24 hours in this facility.
Most of the crop is sold wholesale. The Carpenters make value-added tea blends themselves, which they sell through their website.
We're producing between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds dried material per year. But everything we dry starts out fresh, so it's generally between 75 and 95% moisture. So we're starting out by harvesting 10,000, 15,000 pounds of fresh material and turning it into 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of dried material. What we were taught as herbalists is the plants in their dried form should look, smell, taste, and feel as close as they did when they were growing in the field, and that's our goal, is to produce a dried, marketable material that has retained as much of the quality as possible, and we feel like we've met that goal.
The Carpenters stress quality control in their business. Much of the skepticism about herbal medicine stems from both fluctuations in the quality of the plant and a lack of consumer education.
Herbs are very popular, and it's a huge huge industry now, and there's a lot of money to be made in this herbal industry, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. I think in some ways, if it's done wisely, it supports a lot of wonderful growers and people that make products and people that are doing classes. So on this side, fabulous, and most importantly, it's getting people well and having them connect to nature. On the other side, there's a lot of things that are just being marketed that aren't really helpful and can sometimes be potentially harmful to people and just cost a lot of money. And so that's where I feel like people just need to be well educated. If you pull something just right off the grocery store shelf, it's like anything. Where was it grown? How was it harvested? How much echinacea is actually in there?
As an herbalist, Melanie is asked all the time what someone should take to prevent an illness or some discomfort. Her homespun wisdom is simple. Listen to your mother and your grandmother.
One of the things that people that grew up in the last generation, they used to be much more connected to the land, and so they knew to make spring tonics of dandelion leaf. They would harvest those and just eat them as their salad greens. And they also knew to pick elderberry or to make switchel, you know, and different things that were just traditional ways of using plants and ways to eat your medicine. They just did that. And so now it's really become with studies and classes and become very polished, but you go back to the old timers and they know. Oh, I knew that. You should have asked me. You didn't need to take all those classes. You could have just come back here, honey. And so that's really fun to me.
Herbal medicine, or herbalism, predates human history. It's only within the last 200 years, due to advances in science, that modern medicine has become more removed from its herbal roots. Many pharmaceuticals physicians use today, like aspirin, quinine, and opium, have been used as herbal medicines for millennia. The World Health Organization estimates that 80% of some Asian and African countries use herbal medicine as some sort of their primary health care.
The Chinese symbol for the word crisis is two symbols, one that means danger and one that means opportunity.
Dr. Jennifer Eyre is an attending physician at Fletcher Allen Healthcare and an assistant professor at the University of Vermont College of Medicine. Through funding from Fletcher Allen, she is currently training at the University of Arizona's Center for Integrative Medicine. Founded by Dr. Andrew Weil in 1994, the center creates, educates, and supports the philosophy and practice of medicine that addresses the mind, body, and spirit.
It's really important that we have access to urgent care, acute care, trauma care, the gamut from broken legs to solid organ transplants. But that doesn't necessarily affect us on a day-to-day as far as how we take care of ourselves. And there's a longer tradition of things that we can call on that have a larger history that I think we need to pull back in and integrate back into our healthcare. I think that we really need to get creative about how we approach healing, about how we approach patient care, and we need to broaden our horizons a little bit more and look for things that are harmless, cost-effective, patient-centered. Our patients are asking these questions for a good reason.
Eyre believes Western medicine's tentative approach to herbal medicine is due to apprehension and a lack of understanding.
I think that there's often a deep breath or a fear response that may be the initial response of that's out of my league. I don't know anything about it. I didn't learn about it in medical school. So perhaps from a place that's not very well informed. I do think that once more traditional Western trained physicians understand that people are really looking to integrate their treatments. They're coming to the traditional doctor because they still value the science and tradition and history or even their own personal experience of what Western medicine can offer, but they're looking for more. And once people start to realize in medicine that people aren't trying to replace or discredit Western medicine, that we're truly looking to see what things can work in conjunction with Western medicine and what things have evidence, I think that the sigh of relief is palpable.
This is Calendula officinalis. This is a flower that's in the marigold family.
In terms of their own health care, Melanie and Jeff Carpenter take an all-inclusive approach to their health.
Modern technology has has definitely changed the face of medicine, and there's more of a silver bullet approach. You know, if you get sick, you take a pill to either, you know, help you feel better or to mask the symptoms, whereas herbal medicine is more of a preventative approach. And we're trying to encourage people to dovetail the two worlds. In a real acute situation, we definitely recommend people going to see their physician, but for a more preventative, health-centered, nourishing the body approach, we encourage people to use herbal medicine.
We are at a great crossroads where there are so many options. We're really fortunate. We don't just have to use herbs or our home remedies, and we don't just have to use heroic, you know, hospital medicine. We have all of these choices in between. So just like you don't use a screwdriver when you need a hammer, you pick the tool that is at the right tool for the job. So for building wellness, getting rid of stress, I use herbs for that all the time, and including when I'm really sick. But if I get in a car accident and I break my leg, I'm headed to the doctor. And I think that that's where when we get into dichotomies, one or the other, we're at a real loss. I think it's much better to blend them and take what's best from all of it and utilize it well. I don't think you should choose one or the other. I think you should have it all. Yeah.
Back in the echinacea, the bees continue their work. They move from flower to flower, not favoring one over another. They take it all in. It's a holistic approach, and perhaps a lesson from the insect world that applies to the human world as well. In Hyde Park, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
For our final segment today, we join UVM Extension horticulturalist Leonard Perry. Leonard is already in the holiday spirit inside a greenhouse where he's seeing all kinds of colors.
There's nothing that really puts me in the Christmas spirit more than visiting a local greenhouse and seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of poinsettias, as we see here at Clausen's greenhouses in Colchester before the holiday season. And there's just so many different types. There's some new types in addition to the traditional red ones that you might want to consider. This is probably one of the most different. This is a rose series. It's a red and a pink rose. It actually looks kind of like a rose, very different. This is one that I've liked. It came out several years ago called Monet. A new one, a punch series. There's a sparkling and a nice punch with a little bit of white in the leaves. Traditional white. You can get just a traditional pink. One such as this, which is again a kind of different one with speckles in it. This has a lot of speckles. This is called glitter. There's an older variety called Jingle Bells. It's really nice. And then there are the types with kind of white on the edges. That's called a marble type. And there's red and white marbles. And then for one that's, if you want a really maroon color, there's this new maroon color of poinsettia. So those are just some of the range of the different types. If you can't decide, how about a tricolor mix? Several put together, or even a couple of colors, as we see in the back with the punch series, the ice punch and the sparkling punch, the red and the pink with the white in it. We saw earlier in the small size. So again, if you have a small space or want to put them on small tables, the small sizes, but the big ones, even you can hang ones like this. I often get one of these. They're so full, take the hanger off and just set that on a table, and it just is beautiful there. So as far as choosing them, a couple of other things to keep in mind when you do go out and look for them. Keep in mind that these colored parts are actually modified leaves called bracts. The bits in the center, the little yellow parts, are the flowers. And that's what you want to look at, because when choosing one, you want those either not open or still very tight. If they're all the way open, that means the poinsettia is pretty old and going past, hasn't had the right care. If they're not even there, again, a good side that hasn't had the right care. So you want these little yellow buds in the center, which are the true flowers. Also, look at the foil for a couple of reasons. One is often it hides lack of leaves, or in this case, kind of one-sided. This didn't get enough light on this side. You want one that's balanced all the way around. So look for that. And also, the foil, attractive as it is, will hold water if it doesn't have a hole. Usually they don't. So when you get that home, either take the foil off, or what I do is make a small hole hole in the bottom, put it in a saucer to keep the water from draining onto furniture. And that way you can see how much water is there. You don't want the poinsettia sitting in water. That's one of the things it doesn't like. But first, to get it home, once you've chosen one, you want to protect it from cold. They really don't like cold that we have up here. Very sensitive. That can make the flowers turn bad. So make sure if they're small, in a paper bag or this sleeve, as it's called, for plants, make sure it's fastened at the top, either with tape or a staple. So a good store will do that. Insist on that, or else your plant may not live when it's coming home. Make sure the car is warm. All these things, remember, it doesn't have a coat on. That's all it's got to protect it from the cold. And then once home, you want to make sure, again, that it doesn't get overwatered. If in doubt, don't water. Keep it on the dry side and make sure it drains well. And keep the poinsettias away from windows or wood stoves. They really don't like warm or cold drafts on them. Other than that, they're pretty foolproof, will last a long time. And one of the things to keep in mind, too, that I often get questions about, even from my daughter this year, is the poinsettia poisonous to people or pets? And the answer is no. That's a myth. It's not poisonous to pets or people. Pets may sample a leaf, like our cats did this year, and with the milky sap in there, they'll find quickly that that doesn't taste very good and doesn't agree with their tummies. But these are not poisonous. And there's some other holiday plants you might consider, though, if you want something different or plants to last a long time. One is the cyclamen. These come in various sizes, from real small to real big. This is actually a miniature cyclamen. There are ones with bigger flowers. It's a regular cyclamen. Again, purples, whites, bicolors, reds like this. This is a good stage to buy a cyclamen. You want a few flowers open, a few buds, and look underneath because you want some other flowers coming along as well, some of those buds. The cyclamen likes it cool. Poinsettia likes it warm. This likes it cooler, maybe 55 to 65, and it likes even watering. This one, too wet or too dry, leaves may drop off and turn yellow. So even watering with a cyclamen, not sitting in water but not too dry either, will keep this for the longest time. Another one that you often see in stores all over is the calancho. This is actually a succulent, meaning it's very succulent leaves, very thick. It's kind of a dry, xeriscape type plant, so it really doesn't like to be overwatered. This comes in reds, oranges, yellows, purples, a lot of really bright colors. So again, a little bit on the dry side. This will last for weeks, probably, maybe 2 or 3 months even, with the flowers coming on those. So that's a great one to have, as is, if you want one, probably the longest lasting is the Christmas cactus. This is the one I've heard people say they got from their grandmother, they've had for 20 or 30 years. As it grows, gradually repotted every few years, maybe a clay pot. But this is in a hanger, but you can also put it in just a regular pot on a table. And this will bloom around Christmas. Purples, there's whites, there's reds on the Christmas cactus. So again, a cactus, so again, don't overwater this, keep it a bit on the dry side if anything, and hopefully you would get many years of bloom out of this. So, just to recap with the poinsettia, don't overwater, keep them away from drafts, away from windows, away from wood stoves, they don't like that either, and treat it as a house plant with as much light as you can give it after the holidays and fertilizer. For University of Vermont Extension, I'm Leonard Perry.
Well, thank you, Leonard, and thank you for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson, and from all of us here at Across the Fence and WCAX-TV, our best wishes for a happy Thanksgiving.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.